To fight for our vaginas, we need to know them, because knowledge is power.
But in about half of the world's countries, sex ed is ineffective.
And only 13 states in the US require medically accurate sex ed.
It's time to educate ourselves. I'm Mona.
And I'm Mae.
I'm a journalist at The Guardian.
And I'm a filmmaker there.
And this is
Vagina Dispatches. So if we're not getting this in the classroom, where are we supposed to get it?
Well, if sex education is about more than sex, it should kind of start a lot earlier on, maybe at home.
My parents are Tibetan Buddhist, so they're pretty open about sexuality. It wasn't like I had shame surrounding that, but I still didn't learn a ton about my own body necessarily.
Some parents don't know some of this stuff, right? My mum did. She's a former gynecologist. She knew what she needed to tell us. And I think that is a really difficult line to tread about figuring out what is age appropriate, right? But I don't think 29 is the appropriate age, which seems to be the point at which I'm having this conversation with my mum. That seems a little late. I went back to London, to the home I grew up in, to speak to my mum. Hi, Mum. She was a doctor for 30 years, including 11 as a gynecologist. Where should women be finding out that information?
Any education should start at home.
You say it starts at home, but we didn't really have those conversations.
I used to get lots of medical journals, like about discharge, about period, about anything. I opened that and put it on the coffee table.
Why would I pick up a medical journal and
it's
start
a medical
reading
journal talking about vaginal discharge.
That doesn't interest a 15-year-old to pick it up and read it.
Then I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Why do you think you did it that way?
You were very cheeky. You will go deeper and deeper and ask more and more and more.
What's wrong with that?
Because some of the things parents don't want to talk about. Because my feeling and my view, you don't have to have an intimate relationship to appreciate the other person. So I was hoping that would never happen to my children.
To be a fair and good doctor, people had to come to you with their problems and you wouldn't judge them. I think you had different standards for us and you would have judged me.
I'll have my worry, I have my fear. That will result in a trauma, whether it's a termination or is she going to catch some condition. As a mother, you cannot separate your emotion. That's not double standard.
I'm finding this a little bit upsetting.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So what you're saying, that every single relationship will either end in a termination or an STD or some kind of trauma like that, you instilled that in us, that relationships were so wrong.
Sorry. That is me.
If I sound really angry, I don't think it's completely fair because I understand that you have come from a completely different culture. You know, there's so much more that happens in your body beyond sex that you kind of need to know what's normal.
Everybody has a question about their body, about their ability, about everything. And no matter what you're concerned, they can be addressed and they can be dealt with.
That's a nice ending.
Yeah, that's nice.
Is that enough?
Yeah,
Everything is, oh my God.
I don't want to be unfair to my mum though, because the truth is these conversations between parents and kids can be kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I didn't have great sex ed in school.
What did you learn about?
Put condoms on some bananas.
Nice.
My math teacher told us to use latex gloves when you're fingering a girl, which is like really unhelpful and just impractical.
I just feel like so much of what I learned was about childbirth or how to avoid getting pregnant, basically.
Yeah, or STIs, things that would put you at risk.
It sends quite a negative message if that's the only information you're getting, you know?
Right, I think it's important, but there's also other things that you could learn that are age appropriate about your own body.
Yeah.
I was trained on how to become a sex educator in Georgia, and they're abstinence only. And I remember like a brief chapter came up on like teaching about like homosexuality, and it was shut down so fast by the other students in the class. I was really appalled, and that's when I thought I will never teach in Georgia.
Everything's wrong in sex ed in America. We don't start off with the basic form of sex for all of us is self-touching, self-exploration. That's how we learn about our bodies.
I don't think I learned anything about my own body in Catholic school. That presentation of sex ed was zilch.
The U.S. government doesn't set out standards for sex ed, so programs vary a lot across the country.
To find out what is on the curriculum, we went to Urban Retreat in Washington, D.C.
Quick show of hands, who's here at Urban Retreat for the first time? Welcome, you guys.
Urban Retreat is funded by Advocates for Youth and brings together young people from all over the US who are interested in changing sex ed and fighting for reproductive health.
So to start off, what was sex ed like for you?
They made us turn in these slips that were like, I won't have sex until I'm married, in front of the class, and they called you up one by one.
We had only like scare tactics about the worst case scenarios of STIs and like how you can die from like all of them, but then he didn't tell us how to prevent any of the STIs.
They had like 4 guys get up in front of the room and they gave them each an Oreo, and like then they had to spit out the Oreo into a cup, and then like at the end they gave her back the cup with all the spit out Oreos in it, and they were like, is this what you want to be like for your husband on your wedding night?
And then like at the end of 8th grade, 4 girls were pregnant, and all of them like, yeah, had babies. I know, I was like, this doesn't make sense because we had top-notch sex ed, so why are they pregnant?
Bad sex ed has real consequences.
The US has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates for developed countries, and 1 in 4 US females between the ages of 15 and 19 has an STI.
We talked with young people from Alabama, where abstinence-only education is the norm.
And local laws can forbid teachers from discussing LGBT issues.
Most of what I learned about sex at that point came from like the internet, and accidentally stumbled across like really explicit material about sex. And I think that led me to becoming sexually active before I was really ready.
I was closeted in a very small homophobic town. The message was also very abstinence only until marriage. And I actually, as a child, was sexually abused. It made me just feel really guilty and ashamed of myself as a person because they were saying, don't do this until marriage, but it had already happened to me.
I'm realizing that like this stuff is not reversible, right? All of you guys know you shouldn't feel ashamed for having however much or however little sex you want to have, but everyone is still dealing with feelings of shame and guilt, right? Because you can't take back that negative message.
Who's teaching pleasure? Who's teaching people how to have an orgasm? Who's even dealing with that concept?
I would keep it so simple. Like, if it feels good and it's safe, go for it. And if it feels bad and you don't want to do it, just stop it.
You don't want to push sex on kids too early. But before you've ever had sex, and then the act of sex is crazy, right? Something's going in your vagina, it's like big. So yeah, I tell my daughter, like, practice. Practice having sex before you have sex.
Okay, we can't teach a full sex education class in one episode, but there are some basics that we wish we'd known before starting this series.
So we invited our friends and my mom to talk about what we didn't know.
First up, washing.
Don't use soap inside your vagina. It can cause infection.
And don't use douches because the vagina is self-cleaning.
You can use a washcloth with water or a very gentle, non-scented soap on your vulva.
I learned about douching from my middle school peers.
It's also like a whole. If you're looking at penises, the whole package is out there.
It should be noted that penises are not self-cleaning. You have to clean them.
Next up, discharge.
The glands inside the vagina and cervix produce fluids that carry away dead cells and bacteria to produce this clear or milky substance.
But if it's really thick, gets smelly, green, or, well, any other colour, then you could have a health issue down there.
Getting discharged, like the only reference I had was that came out of my nose or my mouth, I have a cold. So I was like, oh, my vagina has a cold, you know? Like, you compare your vagina to other parts of the body, and it's actually different in some respects.
One of my gynecologists said, it's like tapioca pudding. That's as far as it can go, it's okay. And I was like,
And your pubes. It's healthier to leave them on.
If you want to maintain, trimming is better than shaving or waxing, which can cause ingrown hairs and infection.
I've only had a wax once, and it was the worst day of my life. I don't have that many, and I bled for like 2 days.
Whoa!
Yeah.
We actually spoke to a gynecologist who said it's particularly bad for women of colour because their hair texture is different, and so the
Never
risk
crossed
of.
my mind.
But it makes sense, right? The risk of ingrowing hairs is going to be more if you have thick hair, right?
Now for periods. Cramping might be painful, but it's often normal.
Intense cramping and a super heavy flow could mean you have a condition like endometriosis, which is when the uterine lining can build up outside of the uterus.
I had sort of 2 days in college where I couldn't get out of bed, so I finally went to talk to a woman and she told me that I am anemic.
I had fibroid tumors. And you know, when you're working, you're just planning all day. How are you going to make it from one meeting to the next? And it's really challenging.
Next, UTIs, or urinary tract infections.
About 1 in 2 women get them at some point in their lives.
Many UTIs occur because bacteria from the anus travels up the urethra.
The results can be burning, peeing a lot, getting shaky, and a fever.
Better than any kind of treatment, obviously, is just prevention. You should be wiping from front to back, which I did not know. I know that at least one person in this room discovered this, like, within the last week. I don't think they're going to come forward. It was Mae. Mae didn't know to wipe from front to back.
I've heard it, but then I just didn't practice it.
Now for consent. Remember, yes means yes.
If you can't tell what your partner wants, then you have to ask.
Consent can be very sexy. You know, maybe you're dancing or talking and having a good time and you're not exactly sure. Instead of assuming, just whisper in their ear, what do you want to do right now? Because they'll probably tell you.
Sometimes you really don't know how you're feeling. I just wasn't ready, or they didn't approach me properly.
And of course, pleasure.
If you're having sex, it's worth getting what you want.
So don't be afraid to speak up about what makes you feel good. If someone's always been giving you set menu A,
It's amazing.
and then all of a sudden you're like, I actually don't like that thing that you do, and like they've been doing it for a month, it feels like it's a real insult to be like, can you stop that?
I always say that I'm in this long relationship with myself.
I think regardless of how long you've been with someone, there's still kind of a delicacy to how you talk to somebody. Otherwise, people do feel very hurt.
I grew up in a very fundamentalist religion. It was super hard for me to learn to talk about pleasure and what was pleasurable for me.
Then there's childbirth.
During birth, the cervix dilates to 10 centimeters and the vaginal canal expands.
But for most women, the vagina eventually goes back to how it was before the birth.
But tearing of the perineum happens for about 90% of women. It's often sewn up right after delivery.
I'd had the baby, then you have the placenta, you're like, I basically gave birth to 2 things today, I'm done, I'm calling it a wrap. And then they're like, oh, well, you tore a little bit, so we have to sew you up. That was actually kind of uncomfortable, but I think it healed pretty quickly, and mine wasn't super bad.
I have worked really, really hard to feel comfortable in my body, and I don't think that I should put myself through a situation where I have to like negotiate that again. But I'm a person who's in relationships with other women, so does that mean that I'm saying like, I want kids, you pushing them out? So I feel
welcome to male privilege.
Menopause occurs when the ovaries stop producing estrogen and progesterone.
On average, menopause happens at age 51.
And the vagina changes too.
The walls get thinner and lubrication slows down, so sex can be painful.
I was not sleeping, and migraine headaches, and vaginal issues of all kinds.
From what I understand, the idea that like changes in your vagina make sex less comfortable as women get older is actually really, really quite common.
I have learned that that's really common. And I also talked to a lot of women for whom the whole process really was quite simple. People will say, oh yeah, I think I had a hot flash. Yeah, I think I had 1, maybe I had 2. And I'm gonna go, I've had 2 just talking to you.
Obviously, this isn't a complete education.
But we wanted to talk about some of the stuff that isn't about sex, because there's so much more to our vaginas than just that.
Figuring this stuff out has been kind of uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, but I think it was worth it. We needed to share those personal experiences to figure out what we didn't know.
And that's why we made the series, because so many of us are still in the dark about our own bodies.
hug in this version. Is that too much?
It's too much.
It's too much.
It's too much. If she was a gynecologist, why do you think you have these massive holes in your knowledge?
Massive hole.
Just a really deep hole.
Gaping hole.